Sophie Casicove, and I am honored to be welcoming our speaker, Ari Shavit. I would first like to thank tonight's sponsors, Hillel, the Watson Institute for International Studies, J Street U Brown, and Brown Students for Israel. This morning, I had the privilege of being in a workshop with student journalists where Mr. Shavit shared one of his primary goals in conducting interviews: to access the language people use to talk to themselves. The subjects of Mr. Shavit's work speak many different languages. They speak in Hebrew, Arabic, and English, and they speak in the languages of hope, defeat, conviction, and fear. Through his graceful storytelling, Mr. Shavit weaves together these voices into a complex and often contradictory Israeli narrative, cobbling together partial and sometimes flawed visions to create his own vision for Israeli society, one in which everyone's language can be heard. We have accessed this vision through Mr. Shavit's work at Haaretz, where he has been a columnist since 1995 and now serves on the editorial board. And we have accessed it in his critically acclaimed New York Times bestseller, My Promised Land, published last year. We are thrilled to welcome Mr. Shavit to share his vision with us tonight at this critical point in the discourse surrounding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on this campus. Now please join me in welcoming Ari Shavit.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. I must apologize first that in case I will not be totally coherent, or in case I just collapse at the podium, it's because I had very, very inspiring, stimulating, but demanding days, because I have such a passion regarding American campuses, especially young people on campuses. I took upon myself quite a lot, and I think in the last 2.5 days I spoke to 13, 14 groups of youngsters, and apparently some of the people producing this film still assume that Israelis are Superman. So I did my best to deal with that. But in case we will pay some of the price of that intensive days, I apologize for that. I'm really thrilled to be here. I was in Providence in the past because I have family here. I was never in Brown in the past, so it's a real privilege to be here. And what I experienced here since 8:30 a.m. in the morning really moved me. I think we had some serious, deep, engaging conversations. I learned a lot. I met wonderful, wonderful young people, both intelligent, sensitive, and full of great values. And it's the dialogue with them that really inspired me. And I will get to that issue, to what I've learned and what is to be said about this important dialogue as I speak. I was asked to begin with to speak about the summer and about the challenges facing Israel and America and the Middle East, and I'll do that. But because of what I've heard yesterday in Yale, today here, I will also refer to some of the fundamental issues of Israel, which I dealt with in my book. So I hope it won't be too long, not too tiring, but let's cover whatever we can cover. We all had a traumatic summer. It was one of the saddest summers I can remember. Israel was confronted by Hamas. America was confronted by ISIS. And the Jewish people were confronted by some old hates that we thought are gone. But as the events of the summer, and I was aware of it, became even more aware of it because of my dialogue in the last few days, as the events of the summer have raised again some of the fundamental questions regarding Israel, the justification for Israel's existence, the question of what is Israel all about. I begin by talking about that and getting to our traumatic summer a bit later on. In my book, I went on the journey of writing my Promised Land. I asked myself 3 questions. Why Israel? What's Israel? And will Israel? But I did not try to answer them with an argument, with theory, with polemics. I tried to answer them with a story of my nation as I see it. But as I told the story in a personal way, I had to begin with my own beginning. In my own beginning, as those of you who read the book know, is my great-grandfather, Herbert Enbridge, who is now family in Providence, but who traveled from London to Palestine in April 1897. My great-grandfather was a successful, self-made London lawyer. Except for the fact that he was Jewish, he was a Victorian gentleman in every way possible. He even resembled physically the Prince of Wales. He loved the empire, he loved the Queen, he loved the theatre, he loved Shakespeare, he loved the Lake District, and he loved Tintagel Corner. He was as British can be. So the question I ask myself is, why would such a British Victorian gentleman leave behind London, that was the capital of the world, and travel to the remote, desolate province Palestine was? And basically I came up with 2 answers. And I think these answers are relevant to the questions some young people ask this summer or after the summer. The first answer is that the early Zionists, of which my great-grandfather was a junior player, had a brilliant, tragic insight. They realized that Europe was becoming a death trap to its Jews. They did not know there would be a Holocaust. They did not know there will be gas chambers. They did not know the 20th century will produce such awful places as Auschwitz and Treblinka. But they realized that new kind of anti-Semitism, race-based, is becoming even more dangerous than the old religion-based anti-Semitism. And therefore, if something drastic won't be done, the Jews will be killed by the Europe they so love. And they did love Europe so much. Faced with this radical challenge that no other people faces, the challenge of extinction, they came up with the most radical solution possible. They transferred the people from one continent to another and took a land and revived the nation, revived the language, just to save us. Just that we could go on living as individuals and as a people. And why is this especially relevant today, here? Because when some claim that Zionism is colonialism, I'm filled with rage. because nothing is further than the truth. We were not sent by some empire to some distant land to rob it. On the contrary, we went back to our ancient homeland because we faced death. We were not the agents of empires. We were not part of the masters of the world. But we had to run for our lives. And the brilliant project the early Zionists launched was based on the idea of using European political power, wealth, science, technology in order to build a safe haven away from Europe that will save the Jews from the wrath of Europe. Colonizers? For 1,500 years, we were Europe's ultimate other. And then we were about to become Europe's ultimate victim. We had to go there because there was no other way. And if we had not gone there, we would not have survived. And the one real sin of Zionism is that it came too late. Because if my great-grandfather had gone to Palestine in 1877 rather than 1897, if Haaretz would have appeared earlier, if we would have had a Jewish state in the 1920s, millions and millions and millions of people would have been saved. So I ask young people, and I ask scholars and academics of the day not to get confused and not to buy into that kind of vicious, unfounded propaganda that is being spread these days in American and European universities. But there was another brilliant insight the early Zionists had. And in this sense, perhaps my privileged great-grandfather was more relevant. Because the early Zionists also realized that once the pogroms will subside and the Cossacks will be gone and the brutal, violent anti-Semitism will not be there, we will be faced with a different kind of challenge that is exactly the opposite. Because the old way that Jews have survived in the diaspora was based on what I call in my book the two great Gs: the intimate relationship with God and the defense of the wall of the ghetto. That the intimate relationship with God was changing and the four walls of the ghetto were falling. So we, non-ultra-Orthodox Jews, are challenged in the modern era. Because ultra-Orthodox Jews will be okay in 100 years' time and probably in 1,000 years' time in their ghettos, in Brooklyn or Antwerp or Manchester or Neighbor. But the question whether we can maintain non-ultra-Orthodox Jewish existence, non-ultra-Orthodox Jewish civilization, non-ultra-Orthodox Jewish identity is an open question. So if we want to have meaningful Jewish life in North America, in New Haven and in Providence and in Boston, we need a place, a home, that will be a powerhouse for modern, liberal, democratic Jewish identity. We need in Israel much more than the ultra-Orthodox. And this is where I have raged regarding Israeli politics of the day, of the last decades. because we have let ultra-Orthodox politics and extreme nationalists in Israel take over large chunks of our political system. So the kind of message that comes out of Israel these days, with settlements and with church and state issues and other issues, is one that drives away young American Jews from Israel and from Jewish life. So just as I'm angry at the anti-Zionists who do not get it, I'm angry at those who are supposed to be hyper-Zionists who don't get it. Because the only justification and the need for Israel is to have a truly liberal and democratic Israel that will be an inspiration for any young Jewish student studying in Brown, and will be relevant and fascinating for any non-Jewish student studying in Brown. If we are not relevant in Brown, if we are not part of your world and universe, we are betraying ourselves and we are endangering our future. What has happened this summer? Early July, I realized what was about to happen. So I walked into the room of my 10-year-old Michael and my 5-year-old Daniel, and I told them that in the coming days, they will hear something they've never heard before. The howling sound of sirens. Michael was born just as the second Intifada subsided and suicide bombing stopped. Daniel was born 5 years later into the heart of Israel's calm decade. We had some rounds of violence during this decade, which I'll discuss soon. But by and large, definitely in central Israel, life was as calm as it ever was. Less Israelis and less Palestinians got killed during these years than in previous decades. So in many ways, many Israelis bought into the illusion that Israel is Southern California. And indeed, in so many ways, we are Southern California. We have the same high-tech, we have the same sun, the same beach boys and beach girls. And my boys, in many respects, are just like American boys and girls. They wear the same clothes, they listen to the same music, they disappear in the same iPads. I realized that something is about to change. So I wanted to warn them and to prepare them. 2 days later, the sirens did howl. And although I prepared them, when we walked down to the basement of our nice suburban home, the shielded room, Michael asked if a missile might hit our house and destroy it. And Daniel asked if Iron Dome might be broken. So I thought of some other sirens I've heard. In 1967, I was 9. No occupation then, no settlements. And yet our neighboring Arab nation closed in on us. Everything was less sophisticated then, much more direct and much more clear. Their aim was to destroy Israel, and the rhetorics was the rhetorics of throwing the Jews into the sea. We turned to the world to defend us. France, our greatest ally, betrayed us at the moment of truth. The UN was supposed to defend us, vanished. And even the great friend we had at the White House at the time could not help us. So there was real fear in Israel, which I remember vividly as a sensitive young boy. 22 years after Auschwitz, many feared a new Auschwitz. Preparations were made for mass graveyards to be dug in central Tel Aviv. So when the sirens howled on the morning of June 5th, 1967, I was in elementary school, and we rushed to the orange road surrounding my school in Rehovot. We feared the worst. As we know, that war ended with a spectacular, surprising victory. But 6 years later, there were sirens again. And this time it was exactly the opposite. Israel was a self-confident, arrogant regional power that was taken totally by surprise. And we almost lost the war. And if it wasn't for American support during that war, who knows what would have happened. 18 years later, sirens again. Saddam Hussein sent his Scud missiles to Israel. At that time, I'm a young journalist, a young married man. And I'll never forget the moment when I rushed down the stairs as the sirens were howling to help our elderly neighbors. They were Holocaust survivors. They somehow escaped Europe, went to Miami, and some 30 years later decided to make Aliyah. So as I helped them put their gas masks on their faces while they were shivering, I thought of the fate of our people. And how is it that these people that have experienced and survived the worst have to experience such fears again? But now it was the summer of 2014, and it was my own boys, my American-like boys, who were joining this sad Israeli ritual, confronting the fact that they are not like American boys and girls, that there is a cloud hanging over them. There is a challenge they face that no children in any other democracy face. What was the summer all about? It was the fourth asymmetric war we've experienced. The previous ones were 2006, 2008, 2012. What's an asymmetric war? When sub-state players who are extremists but have considerable capability, but they know they cannot defeat Israel or conquer Israel, try to hit Israel by attacking its civilian population while hiding behind their own civilian population, creating a situation where Israel cannot use its military might to defend itself. What made this one worse than the previous ones were several facts. First, that it was long, 50 days. The second, that this time Tel Aviv and central Israel were hit. The blood of the Tel Aviv people is not thicker than the people of Sderot or Nahal Oz. On the contrary, I have more respect to the people living out there. But there is a great symbolic and strategic significance to the fact that Israel's commercial and cultural and financial capital was attacked day after day. Just imagine what would have happened if an Al-Qaeda group would have taken over Guantanamo and fired rockets at New York day after day for 50 days. Even if no people would have been killed, what would have been the implication of that? What would President Obama, as peaceful as he is and as much as he searches peace, what would he have done if that was the case? This is what happened this month. But the third element that made this one worse is the fact that we've seen as a reaction ugly, disturbing, anti-Semitic phenomena, especially in Europe. 70 summers after the last summer of Auschwitz, many of the people, nations that have sent their Jews to Auschwitz have lost shape. And what we've heard in Germany this summer was unheard of before, since 1945. How did Israel do during this campaign? Israel was very impressive on the defensive. Its leadership, that I'm not a great supporter of, tried to be as restrained as possible and tried to prevent war and tried to prevent escalation. But the real heroes of the summer were, in my mind, the engineers of Iron Dome. Much was said about Iron Dome, but much more should be said. Because if it weren't for Iron Dome, the catastrophe that would have occurred in the Middle East would be much worse than what did happen, which was bad enough. I really think that these gentlemen and ladies should get the Nobel Peace Prize. Because if it weren't for Iron Dome, dozens and hundreds of Israeli civilians would have been killed. And if it weren't for Iron Dome, Israel would have had to conquer the Gaza Strip. If it weren't for Iron Dome, hundreds of young Israelis would have been killed while conquering the Gaza Strip. And if it weren't for Iron Dome, thousands and thousands and thousands of civilians, Palestinian civilians, would have been killed while Israel would have conquered the Gaza Strip. The peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan would have collapsed because there would have been a Tahrir Square pressure on the leadership. And the tide of anti-Semitism we would have seen in anti-Semitism would have been far worse than what we did see. I dare say that even in North America, we would have seen some disturbing anti-Semitic phenomena. All this was prevented by these Israeli technological heroes. But it's not only that. Because Iron Dome would have not been there if it wasn't for American generosity and friendship and wisdom. President Obama is having a rough day today. Let me say that he deserves all the credit, and his administration deserves all the credit for supporting this system in the last few years. Congress is not that popular with you people, as I understand, but Congress deserves credit on that too. So what you see in Iron Dome is that contrary to what we see on other issues, you see first of all Israel at its best, but you also see the American-Israeli alliance at its best. This is exactly how democracies should defend themselves, using the strength they have as free market societies, as high-tech democracies, in order to defend their values and their way of life from dark, barbaric forces. But the other hero of the summer, in my mind, was Israeli society. We've seen some ugly phenomena in Israel, and we have to address them. On the fringes, we've seen racism, we've seen anti-democratic culture. But by and large, Israeli society proved to be resilient and united and impressive throughout this struggle. I wrote in my book, in so many words, that the Israeli society is, in my mind, the eighth wonder of the world. Zionism failed in bringing about the utopia it wanted to build in Palestine and then Israel. The kibbutz dream is shattered. There is no social justice paradise there. But the establishment of a free, robust society is our greatest achievement. This society that is innovative and creative and sensual and full of vitality is the reason to be hopeful about Israel and the reason to be proud of Israel with all its faults and all its flaws. But in this moment of truth in the summer when we were tested, it was like proven. Israelis proved to have a kind of almost British stiff upper lip, dealing with the challenge they had to deal with. But on the other side, there was lack of success of Israel to act on the offense in a precise, decisive manner. There was no elegant, clear solution to the challenge of the asymmetric war. And the result was this use of massive firepower in Gaza, which was problematic. There was no other way. I know the commanders of the Israeli army. They are no extremists. They are moderate people. They want as little violence as possible. They are not warmongers and they are not bloodthirsty. But they found themselves in a situation which we should not have found ourselves in, that forced them to use force in a heavy-handed way. And the result was this terrible devastation and carnage we saw in Gaza. There was probably no other way, and as I say, the motivation was not a vicious one, but the outcome was troubling and painful. And it made it so difficult for so many people who love Israel and care about Israel to understand what Israel is doing. So, the outcome of this summer is not yet clear. I still hope that in the long term, the people of Gaza will rebel against the fascist organization called Hamas that is controlling them. And I ask my liberal friends in America, in Israel, and in Europe not to be tolerant to fascist organizations, even if they happen to be Palestinian. Hamas is not only Israel's enemy, it's an organization that is oppressing gays, and oppressing women, and oppressing Christians, and oppressing individuals. What we would not take from any other nation, what we will not be willing to accept in Europe or East Asia or South America, we should not be willing to accept from these people. But we also must make the distinction between Hamas and the people of Gaza. And the people of Gaza had a horrific, horrific summer. If we were traumatized, they were horrible. And my heart goes out to them. My hope is that long term, they will be able to rebel against that regime and bring a new kind of political reality. And we will have in ourselves the generosity and the heart and the care to help them recover and rebuild Gaza. But while we experienced this trauma, America experienced its own trauma. ISIS is a troubling, frightening phenomenon. Would anyone sitting here thought 5-7 years ago that we will be seeing a phenomena as beheading on YouTube, beheading of innocent Americans who did nothing wrong. Most of them did really good things. But behind these horrific images that terrified us all, there is something even deeper. Because 13 years ago, this great democracy was challenged. The wild Middle East appeared in Manhattan and Washington, killing thousands. So as a reaction, you launched 2 wars. But the wars didn't work out that well. So you tried to go back home. There was fatigue in this nation, semi-isolationism, and an illusion developed that you can run away from the Middle East. But what this summer proved is that you cannot fix the Middle East, you cannot live with the Middle East, but you can also not run away from the Middle East. So what the hell do you do with the Middle East? Think of what has happened over these 13 years. America went as far as Afghanistan to fight Al-Qaeda, just to find Al-Qaeda at Israel's doorstep. America put all it put into bringing Jeffersonian democracy to Iraq. You sent your Marines to establish a McDonald democracy in Baghdad, and the result is ISIS. Something went terribly wrong. Terribly wrong. So while we in Israel had our own illusions, and we lived within our Tel Aviv bubble, you also had your illusion. And what this summer did is prove to us that the bubbles have burst and the illusions were only illusions. And we have to deal with a stark reality that we now open our eyes to see. So what do we see? In my mind, Israel faces 3 or 4 major external challenges. I will spare you the internal challenges. If you invite me next year, I'll come again to talk about them. First one is Iran. Don't let ISIS make you forget Iran. I know people feel uncomfortable addressing it. It seems weird, it's virtual, it's not real. One thing that really makes me critical of my own government and my own prime minister is that they've turned Iran into an Israel issue, very much into a Benjamin Netanyahu. It is not. Iran is a challenge to our civilization. If Iran will go nuclear, the Middle East will go nuclear, and the world order we live in will change. This is not an issue for conservatives or hawks or strategic experts. If this will happen, all of our values will be challenged, whether we are conservative or liberal, Democrats or Republicans, Americans or Israelis. The great success of the international community in the last 70 years was controlling the nuclear gene. If Iran will go nuclear and the Middle East will go wild, the nuclear genie will be out of the bottle, and the 21st century will be about nuclear terror and nuclear horror. The second challenge facing Israel is the Arab chaos. We were also naive only 3.5 years ago, not 35 years ago. We all thought the Google kids are going to rule Egypt. Some of my distinguished colleagues have compared the Arab Spring to the American Revolution or to the French Revolution. But what we see only 3.5 years later is so much despair. What we see is a human catastrophe engulfing large parts of the region. I do not see it only as an Israeli. The Arabs are my neighbors. I feel for them and I care for them. And when I wonder What are the political options facing a young Arab man or a young Arab woman? It's a reactionary monarchy, or a military dictatorship, or an Islamic theocracy, or bloody chaos. Only in Tunisia there is some hope. But the rest of the region is bogged down to tribalism and hate and mutual internal fighting. The fact that we're also helpless with Syria, 200,000 people dead, millions of refugees, shows you how different the Middle East is than the rest of the world. The third challenge facing Israel is the one we talk about a lot, and we should, the Palestinian issue. I'm a two-state solution person. I opposed occupation throughout my adult life, and I always thought settlements are a bad idea. But as we now realize, the conflict is not only about settlements and occupation. And we peaceniks, I include myself in this proud order of people with goodwill, we made many mistakes. And we have to deal with those mistakes. We tried peace in 1993, it did not work. In 2000, Ehud Barak went to Bill Clinton's peace summit in Camp David, broke every Israeli taboo, made the most generous offer. Bill Clinton himself is the most qualified person on this planet to bring about peace, has the IQ and the EQ and the passion and the compassion. But the result was not peace, but the worst terror offensive a democracy has experienced since World War II. With over 1,000 Israelis getting killed, and then 3,000 Palestinians getting killed when Israel fought back. So it's time to deal with this terrible catch. We are in a catch, in a barn. On the one hand, occupation is the silent killer that is killing Israel from within. It's killing us demographically, it's killing us morally, it's killing us politically. We have to deal with it. If the status quo will go on, the Jewish democratic state will be in danger. It's a real existential danger. But on the other hand, we have to deal with the fact that all these previous attempts, all this peace orthodoxy has failed. The fourth challenge facing Israel is relevant to my visit here in Prague. As those of you who've read my book know, I'm a great admirer of the Zionist movement, the wisdom of our founding fathers and mothers. The miraculous success of Zionism was based on two principles. We always had a major, intimate relationship with a major Western power. First the British, then the French, then this great alliance with America. But there was another principle too. We always captured the moral high ground. We realized that we are a small, lonely people who happen to be Jewish. We have morality as part of our DNA. We are no China, we cannot do Tibet. We are no Russia, we cannot do the Ukraine. We cannot only be about brute force, grabbing land, fighting all day. There has to be something more to us. And we always must pursue peace, even if peace is not there. Sadly, in recent decades, that wisdom was partly lost by some Israelis. And in my mind, that's a major threat for us. We are endangering the intimate relationship with the West, the intimate relationship with many of our own people living in the West, mainly in this country. So, as I look at all these challenges, am I a pessimist? I was asked this question several times today. I'm a great optimist. I think we must see reality as it is. We must understand that Israel is a unique entity facing overwhelming challenges that are not facing any Holland and any Portugal. On the other hand, I'm a great believer in Israel. I'm a great believer in Israelis. And by the way, I'm also a great believer in America. Sometimes I have to convince some of my American friends how great America is. Democracies make mistakes, they have their weaknesses, but at the end of the day, they rise and they deal with the challenges, and then they are stronger than any other dark force. But in order to deal with all these challenges, we do need new ideas. We've been too intellectually lazy in the last generation. Let me say briefly what the ideas are that I'd like to offer. Regarding Gaza, we must be firm regarding Hamas and demand the demilitarization of Gaza. But on the other hand, we must have a Marshall Plan that will give the people of Gaza space and hope, life. We must build power stations and water plants and try to persuade the Egyptians to give them some economic space in northern Sinai that will give them life. Only this combination of being firm regarding disarmament, but on the other hand, being generous with the people of Gaza, only this combination can give a sort of solution. There will be no perfect solution for Gaza. It's a horrific, horrific reality. But we can do much more than we have done in recent years. Regarding ISIS, this is not for me, but for you to deal with. But my one advice, as someone coming from the Middle East, is do not let the Middle East feel that there is an American Shiite alliance fighting the Sunnis. The only solution for ISIS is to have the moderate Sunnis leading the fight against them. If the perception in the Middle East will be that there is an Iranian-American Assad alliance against the Sunnis, you might defeat ISIS, but you will have 10 other ISISes emerging. The Sunnis are the vast majority of the Muslim world and of the Arab world. And the Sunnis were America's traditional allies. If they will feel betrayed, the ramifications will be horrible. There might be a need for boots on the ground in Iraq, but the boots on the ground must not be American. They must be of moderate Sunnis, whether they are Egyptians or Saudis or others. If it was done in 1990, it can be done again. Regarding Iran, assertive diplomacy. There's no need to go for radical solutions, but there is a need not to blink. Iran is still a paper tiger, but if it will get nuclear teeth, it will stop being a nuclear paper tiger. One should not yield, and one should not be blind to see the challenge there. The falling price of oil creates a wonderful, wonderful golden opportunity, because Iran is under stress. So assertive diplomacy can, even now at this late stage, save the day. Regarding the Arab chaos and the Palestinian issue, I think that we need a new peace concept. If a formal, final, immediate peace is not possible, let's work on a real, practical, gradual peace. A de facto peace rather than a formal peace. We had that in the past with Jordan between 1970 and 1994. We were very close to Jordan without embassies, without ceremonies, without Nobel Prizes. I think that that kind of approach can bring about today an alliance between many moderate Arabs and Israel. as we face common threats, we're actually closer to each other. But we need to work in a kind of creative way. But part of that regional de facto peace has to be dealing with occupation. We must begin by stopping settlement activity beyond the blocks. But then we should also try to pull out of some areas in the West Bank in a cautious, gradual way, while letting constructive Palestinian forces build a life for Palestinians in these regions. And yet, although new peace is so essential, it will not work if we will not do something else. It's time for us to renew a new kind of Zionism. And this goes right back to what I talked about at the beginning of my lecture. We need an Israel that is a benign Israel. There is no other way for us, both because of ourselves and because of our standing in the world. We must understand that the greatest challenge facing us is these young American Jews who go to this university and others. If we will not have an Israel that they can be proud of, there will not be a future to your great community here, and there will not be a future for us there. As you hear, I really care and worried about Iran and about the Arab chaos and about the other issues. But the most important issue of all is our young. The young here and the young in Israel. So the only way forward was to renew liberal Zionism. We must give young Israelis a feeling of social justice and a meaningful life. So if they are asked to risk their lives in order to defend their homeland, they know it's worthwhile. They know that Israel is a serious Israel and moral Israel that has solidarity and justice, that justifies this great risk. But we also need that Israel for young American and diaspora Jews. What we are doing right now is criminal. Criminal. We are letting these ultra-Orthodox forces, these secular extremists, and these extreme Tea Party Israelis endanger the Jewish future. As I've been around this country in the last months, I'm filled with admiration to what the American Jewish community has produced. Not only Israel is wondrous, but what you have here is wondrous too. The 20th century was the most dramatic in our dramatic history. Its first half was our worst ever. We lost every third Jew. But its second half was our best ever. We created Jewish sovereignty there, and you created the perfect diaspora here. The perfect diaspora. It's not only that so many Jews succeeded personally in academic life and business and professional. This amazing community that you've built on a voluntary basis, just as we did sovereignty there, you did voluntary work here. This is not something we should be ashamed of or defensive about, but we should be proud. It should be an example for any other minority in this country or other country. But both the Israeli wonder and miracle and the American Jewish miracle are in jeopardy. We don't have much time. I think we have a decade. We must change course both there and both here. But I'm sure that if we'll be as wise and courageous and creative as our founding fathers and mothers, as the early Zionists, we'll be able to deal with the challenges of the 21st century just as we did with the challenges of the 20th century. I asked in my book, as I said, these three questions. Why Israel? Because there is a need. There is a moral imperative to have a home for the homeless people. And what's Israel? It's vitality against all odds. Will Israel and will the great American Jewish community? That depends on us. Let us act. Thank you very much.